For decades, America preached the gospel of free markets. It pointed to China as the textbook example of a state controlled economy that was doomed to fail. The message was simple: real innovation, real prosperity only happens when the government gets out of the way. But what if I told you that was all about to change? What if America is now tearing pages out of China's own economic playbook, pumping hundreds of billions of your tax dollars into private companies to fight a new kind of war? This isn't just some subtle policy tweak. This is the story of how the United States is quietly ditching its own economic religion, making a massive gamble to try and win the 21st century. And it forces us to ask a terrifying question: will this be the move that saves America, or will it be the one that destroys it from the inside out? To really get how radical this shift is, we have to turn back the clock. For the better part of 50 years, the world's two biggest economies ran on completely opposite software. It was a clash of ideas, a global debate over the best way to get rich. In one corner, you had the United States, the undisputed champ of free market capitalism. The American way, especially after the Soviet Union collapsed, was sold as the one size fits all blueprint for success. This idea, often called the Washington Consensus, was all about deregulation, privatization, and wide open trade. The government was supposed to be a referee, not a player. Its job was to enforce the rules and then step aside to let the invisible hand of the market do its thing. American presidents, from Reagan to Clinton to Obama, jetted around the globe selling this economic gospel. They warned other countries about the perils of industrial policy when governments try to pick winners and losers by propping up their favorite industries. That, they argued, was a one-way ticket to corruption and failure. A government worker in an office building, no matter how smart, could never outsmart the market. Companies should live or die on their own merits, not because they had friends in high places. And the poster child for everything America warned against, China. China's model was a totally different animal: state-led capitalism. In Beijing's playbook, the state isn't the referee, it's the coach, the star player, and the team owner all at once. Through a tangled web of state-owned companies, five-year plans, and huge state-directed subsidies, the Chinese Communist Party has steered the country's economy with an iron fist. They built national champions in key industries, from steel to solar panels. They poured state cash into technologies they decided were critical for the future. Plans like Made in China 2025 were basically public announcements that they intended to dominate entire global industries. To American economists, this was heresy. They saw a centrally planned system that was bound to collapse under its own weight. They called it a house of cards, propped up by stolen ideas and mountains of debt. For years, the official line out of Washington was that China's model wasn't just wrong, it was illegitimate. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. America celebrated the kid in a garage with a wild idea. China celebrated the state-owned giant with a direct line to Beijing. One preached hands-off, the other meticulous state control. For decades, this was the central drama of the global economy. But then, something broke. The world America had championed started to show deep cracks. The first tremors hit after the 2008 financial crisis, which blew up the myth of self-regulating markets. But the real earthquake, the one that forced a total rethink in Washington, was the COVID-19 pandemic. When the world shut down in 2020, the global supply chains that American companies had spent decades building didn't just bend, they shattered. All of a sudden, the most powerful nation on earth couldn't get its hands on basic medical supplies: face masks, swabs, ventilators. America was shockingly dependent on other countries, mainly China, for the tools it needed to survive a health crisis. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a screaming national security emergency. This vulnerability exposed a truth many had been ignoring for years. America's industrial base had been hollowed out. Decades of sending manufacturing overseas to find cheaper labor had left the country dangerously exposed. The panic over masks quickly became a bigger, scarier realization about semiconductors. These tiny chips are the brain of the modern world. They're in our phones, our cars, our data centers, and most importantly, our most advanced weapons. And America had lost its grip. While the US was still a leader in chip design, the actual manufacturing had fled to Asia, mostly to Taiwan and South Korea. By 2022, the US made only about 12% of the world's chips, down from 37% in the 1990s. This dependency was a ticking time bomb. A crisis in the Taiwan Strait could cut off the world's supply of advanced chips overnight, crippling the US economy and its military. This perfect storm, the pandemic, the supply chain chaos, and the glaring chip vulnerability caused a seismic shift in Washington. The old religion of free market purity suddenly looked naive, even reckless. A new consensus began to form. America couldn't just sit on the sidelines anymore, it had to get back in the game. This new thinking was locked into place with two massive pieces of legislation. First was the Chips and Science Act of 2022. This wasn't just another spending bill, it was a declaration of war on American industrial decline. The act unleashed over $52 billion in government subsidies for semiconductor manufacturing and research right here in the United States. It was a blatant attempt to lure chip makers like Intel, TSMC, and Samsung to build their massive new factories, or fabs, on American soil. Then came the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. Don't let the name fool you. This was one of the biggest industrial policy bills in US history. It set loose hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits and loans to juice up the green energy industry. But there was a catch. To get the best subsidies, companies had to build their stuff, from EVs to solar panels, in North America, using materials from the US or its allies. Together, the CHIPS Act and the IRA were a complete reversal of the old economic gospel. The government was no longer a passive referee. It was actively and unapologetically picking winners. It was using huge sums of taxpayer money to steer corporate decisions, rebuild supply chains, and fight back against China's dominance. The era of free market purity was over. America was now playing a game it had once condemned. So, how exactly is America copying China's playbook? The strategy isn't about the government buying up companies like Beijing does. The American system has its own style. Instead of state ownership, the US government is using a quieter, but just as powerful tool: billions of dollars in grants and loans that come with very demanding strings attached. You could call it a strategy of golden handcuffs. Take the CHIPS Act. When the Commerce Department gives a company like Intel billions of dollars, it's not just cutting a check. That money is a weapon of statecraft. The cash is tied to a list of commitments. Intel gets the grants, but in return, it has to build its most advanced fabs in places like Arizona and Ohio. But the strings go even further. The law flat out forbids these companies from expanding their high-end chip manufacturing in countries of concern, which is Washington speak for China, for a full decade. It's a direct shot at Beijing, designed to choke off its access to the latest technology. On top of that, the deals demand that companies invest in workforce training, use union labor, and even provide affordable childcare for construction workers. This is a massive change. The government isn't just funding a factory anymore, it's using its financial muscle to dictate a company's global strategy, its labor policies, and even its employee benefits. This level of intervention would have been unimaginable a decade ago. It's not state ownership, but it is absolutely state direction. The handcuffs are made of gold, but they're still handcuffs. Washington is telling private companies where to build, who to hire, and who they can't do business with. It's a long way from the ideal of a CEO answering only to the shareholders. Now, CEOs at these critical companies have to answer to Washington too. This model goes way beyond chips. Look at MP Materials, America's only major company for mining and processing rare earth elements. These are minerals that are essential for everything from EV motors and wind turbines to Javelin missiles and F-35 fighter jets. For years, China has owned this market, controlling around 90% of the world's processing. That gives Beijing a terrifying power. It could theoretically cut off the supply during a crisis, crippling the US defense industry. To fix this, the Department of Defense has stepped in with major funding and contracts for MP Materials. The money is specifically aimed at helping the company rebuild an entire American rare earth supply chain, from the mine in California to processing plants in Texas. The goal isn't just to make the company profitable, it's to use it as a strategic asset to break China's monopoly. The same logic is being applied to lithium, the white gold of the 21st century. The Department of Energy is handing out massive loans, like the one for the Thacker Pass project in Nevada, to kickstart a domestic lithium industry. Again, it's not a blank check. The loan helps cover the huge risk of a project that private investors might shy away from. In return, America gets a secure domestic supply of a mineral that's at the heart of its green energy goals, cutting its reliance on China. In every case, the pattern is the same. The US government spots a strategic weakness, picks a private company to be its national champion, and then opens a fire hose of public money with strict conditions to make sure that company follows the government's plan. It's China's playbook, just adapted for the American system: state capitalism through grants and loans instead of state ownership. The second, and maybe more controversial page America has ripped from China's playbook is its wholehearted embrace of picking winners. This is when a government deliberately chooses specific industries it thinks are essential for the future, and then tilts the entire economic field in their favor. For decades, that idea was poison in Washington. The consensus was that governments are terrible at this. They get influenced by lobbyists and political fads and usually end up wasting money on white elephant projects that can't compete. But now, driven by the threat from China, America is all in. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, is the crown jewel of this new strategy. It's a masterclass in picking winners. The law doesn't just say, let's have more green energy. It surgically identifies and subsidizes every single link in the clean energy supply chain, all to build a domestic industry that can challenge China. Take the EV tax credit. The IRA gives you a $7,500 credit if you buy a new electric vehicle. But the rules are designed to do more than just sell cars. They're designed to rewire the entire global auto industry. To get the full credit, more and more of the battery parts and critical minerals inside that EV have to come from North America or an allied country. This is a direct assault on China's stranglehold over the battery supply chain. This domestic content requirement is just a fancy term for protectionism. It's designed to force car companies, American and foreign, to move their operations out of China and into the United States. If you're a car maker who wants to sell in the huge American market, you now have a massive incentive to build your batteries in Michigan instead of Guangdong. The government has picked a winner, American battery manufacturing, and is funneling investment right to it. By early 2024, the IRA was already credited with sparking over $300 billion in private investment announcements and creating more than 170,000 jobs. The IRA does the same thing for solar and wind. China currently dominates the solar panel market, making over 80% of the world's supply. The IRA fights back by offering extra tax credits to solar farms that use American-made steel and parts. It's a flashing neon sign to the market. Build your solar factories here. This is exactly the kind of top-down industrial planning the US used to lecture other countries about. It's a strategy of building walls, with tariffs and sourcing rules, to protect and grow young domestic industries, while using subsidies to help them get strong enough to compete. The parallel to China's own rise is impossible to ignore. Beijing used the exact same mix of protectionism and subsidies to build its world-beating solar and telecom industries. It picked a sector, shielded it from foreign competition, and pumped in state money until its companies were big enough to take on the world. Now Washington is using that same 1-2 punch. This new industrial policy is also about playing defense. The US is using its power to block Chinese companies from key parts of the American economy, citing security risks. The moves to restrict Chinese-made cranes at US ports, the worries over Chinese EVs collecting data on American roads, and the ongoing bans to stop China from getting advanced computer chips are all part of this new economic war. The US isn't just trying to build up its own team, it's actively trying to kneecap the competition. This two-pronged approach is the core of modern industrial policy. The free market purists who used to run the Treasury Department are gone. In their place are national security hawks who believe that in a great power competition, you don't win by playing by an old set of rules. You win by using every tool you've got. So why the huge U-turn? This complete reversal of 50 years of economic policy didn't just happen overnight. The switch was born out of a deep and growing anxiety in Washington, a fear that America was at risk of losing the race for the 21st century. The main reason, without a doubt, is China. For a long time, the folks in Washington believed in a theory called convergence. The idea was that as China got richer, it would inevitably become more democratic, more like us. They thought that letting China into the global economy would tame it. That theory has been proven spectacularly wrong. Instead of changing, China used its new wealth to double down on its authoritarian model and challenge the US-led world order. It has become a true competitor, and in some areas, it's actually pulling ahead. A chilling 2023 report from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute sent shockwaves through Western capitals. It found that China was leading the US in 37 out of 44 critical technologies, including things like robotics, hypersonic weapons, and synthetic biology. For people in the national security world, this wasn't just a report card, it was an existential threat. The comfortable belief that America's technological dominance was guaranteed had simply vanished. This fear of being out-innovated is the heart of the economic war. The competition with China is no longer seen as a friendly game of trade. It's seen as a zero-sum fight for dominance. The winner gets to set the rules for the global economy and military power for the next century. From this point of view, economic security is national security. This is where the term de-risking comes from. US officials are now careful to say they don't want to completely decouple from China. That would be a disaster for everyone. Instead, they want to de-risk. It's like strategically pruning a tree, cutting off the economic ties in areas that are a threat to national security. This means making sure the US isn't dependent on a rival for critical things like chips, medicine, or green energy minerals. The CHIPS Act and IRA are the main tools for this de risking strategy, but the why now is also a story about what's happening at home. For millions of Americans, the promises of globalization rang hollow. Sure, corporate profits soared and some cities boomed, but huge parts of the American heartland were hollowed out. The collapse of manufacturing led to lost jobs, flat wages, and a deep sense of being left behind. That pain fueled a powerful political backlash. This new industrial policy is, in part, an answer to that pain. Supporters argue that by investing in American factories, they're not just fighting China, but also creating good paying jobs and bringing forgotten towns back to life. It's a promise to rebuild the American middle class by rebuilding America. So the big pivot is driven by three powerful forces: geopolitical fear of being overtaken by China, the shocking discovery of our own economic vulnerabilities, and political pressure to fix decades of industrial decline here at home. In the face of all that, the old playbook started to look less like a strategy and more like a suicide pact. The only option left, it seemed, was to start fighting fire with fire. America has placed its bet. It has thrown out its old economic rulebook and is now following a path that looks shockingly similar to the one it used to condemn. The massive question hanging over everything is, will this gamble pay off? Will it save American industry and secure its place in the world? Or will it backfire and poison the US economy from within? The stakes couldn't be higher. Supporters say this is a lifeline for a nation in danger. They see it as a long overdue fix to the failed experiment of unchecked globalization. First, they say, it's about national security. In a world with rising tensions, depending on your main rival for the building blocks of your military and economy is just strategic malpractice. Bringing production of chips and critical minerals back home isn't a choice, it's a necessity. It's about making sure America can never be held hostage. Second, they see this as the only way to really compete with China. For years, the West played by one set of rules while China played by another. An American company worried about next quarter's profits was up against a Chinese state-backed company that could afford to lose money for years just to dominate a market. This new policy, they argue, finally levels the playing field. It lets the US government provide the kind of long-term patient investment that private markets won't. Third, there's the powerful argument for bringing back American manufacturing. This strategy promises a rebirth of industrial jobs, skilled, high-paying work in advanced factories. The money flowing from the CHIPS Act and IRA is already creating new economic hubs in states that were long written off as the Rust Belt. This isn't just about creating wealth, it's about creating a fairer, more resilient economy where prosperity is shared more widely. In this view, the new American playbook is a smart, patriotic response to a changed world. It's a strategy to make America strong, secure, and prosperous. But critics are watching this shift with a deep sense of dread. They see a country abandoning the very things that made it an economic giant and heading down a dark road of corruption, waste, and decline. Their biggest fear is the one America itself used to shout from the rooftops: the government is terrible at picking winners. The second politicians start handing out billions of dollars, the whole process becomes political. Companies will learn that the fastest way to get rich isn't to invent a better product, but to hire a better lobbyist. This leads to crony capitalism, where money flows to the politically connected, not the most innovative. The ghost of Solyndra looms over this whole debate. That was the solar panel company that got a $535 million government loan in 2009, only to go bankrupt 2 years later. It's the ultimate cautionary tale. Critics fear we're setting the stage for 1,000 new Solyndras, wasting billions on projects that the market was right to avoid. They also warn that this will warp the entire economy. By subsidizing a few favored industries, the government pulls money and talented people away from other areas that might have been more productive. It creates artificial bubbles and wastes resources on a huge scale. And this new protectionism is already angering America's closest allies. Policies like the IRA's Made in America rules have sparked fury in Europe and Asia. Our friends complain that the US is boosting its own companies at their expense, kicking off a destructive global subsidy race. Instead of uniting the world's democracies, this America First policy could end up fracturing those alliances. Finally, there's the staggering cost. We're talking about hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of dollars. Who pays for all this? The taxpayer. This mountain of spending could lead to higher national debt, inflation, or future tax hikes, weighing down the economy for decades. In this view, America isn't copying China's strength. It's copying its weakness. It's embracing a model that leads to inefficiency and corruption and undermining the very dynamism that was once its greatest advantage. We are living through a fundamental break with the past. The economic rules that govern the world for nearly half a century, rules largely written by America, have been torn up. In a stunning reversal, the US is now adopting the core strategies of the very system it once tried to defeat. Driven by fear of China and a desire to heal its own wounds, America has launched a massive experiment in state guided capitalism. We are in uncharted territory. Supporters see a bold act of national self preservation. Critics see a path to ruin paved with cronyism and debt. One thing is certain: the global economic order we knew is over. A new era has begun, and it leaves us with the most unsettling question of our time. In its fight to win the 21st century, is America making the moves it needs to survive, or is it in danger of losing itself in the process? The world is changing faster than ever, and understanding these tectonic shifts is crucial. If you want to stay ahead of the curve on the new economic world order and what it means for you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Is this new industrial policy a brilliant move or a disastrous mistake?